CSU has an ambitious 2025 goal of decreasing the graduation rate gap between so-called underrepresented minorities and other races. The problem? The way CSU bundles so-called underrepresented minorities to track those achievement goals statistically ignores how the system is failing black students. Students like Chris Carter.
A lot of people tell you to get to college, but the hardest part is staying in college.
And Chris Carter speaks from experience. The fifth-year senior started as a business major at Cal State Northridge, but struggled as one of just a few black students in his classes.
And those two other black men switched out of business.
Eventually, so did Chris. Then one of his friends dropped out of school.
I didn't feel like I had support from counselors or teachers.
And he's not alone. Across all Cal State University campuses, 63% of students graduate in 6 years. But that number drops to just 50% for black students, and it's even lower for black men. But you wouldn't know that by looking at CSU's Student Success Dashboard. It lumps Native American, Black, and Latino students all together as so-called underrepresented minorities, or URM. But Latino students make up 91% of that group, statistically erasing Black and Native American students from the data. If it sounds confusing, insiders tell us that's probably the point.
Do you think lumping this data together is hiding the problem?
My colleagues at the university would not want me to say this, but I will. Yeah, I think they are hiding it.
We don't want to hear uncomfortable data.
Retired CSU professors Bob Rutger and Kenneth Montero held leadership positions at San Jose and San Francisco State, respectively. They say they've opposed these metrics for years.
It's just methodologically, scientifically wrong.
What's the point of being a bundler of people of color unless you're trying to say we're doing something and that's enough?
For instance, the Cal State system highlighted Chris Carter's school in a report to lawmakers last year, saying they saw the equity gap for underrepresented minority students narrow or improve by 4%. Except the report fails to mention when you unbundle that data, the black graduation rate actually got worse, dropping 1%.
If you're trying to impact the performance rates of black students, you've got to look at black students.
Now, the individual data does exist.
This isn't useful.
To identify the true graduation gap by race and ethnicity,
You have to start downloading the data.
our CalMatters reporting partner, Michael Zinstein, had to independently analyze CSU's raw data,
It's overwhelming.
downloading and combining multiple spreadsheets and independently calculating the gap.
It shouldn't be this hard, but it is this hard because the institution reinforces omitting data that embarrass it and rewards data that make it look good.
We may be making progress, but there's really differences in groups.
In response to the CalMatters data analysis, the issue was raised at a recent CSU board meeting.
That's our sort of legacy metric. And it's, in fact, it's even in our governor's compact, right? So we're being held to that progress.
That's right. As the CSU vice chancellor explained, the Newsom administration is also using their bundled metric to judge their progress towards closing the equity gaps. And while CSU says they do use other metrics too, the bundled URM is the official measure of racial equity progress.
Our struggles are not the same.
Like many, Chris believes the way the state is tracking equity hides how the system is failing certain groups.
Them trying to group us in, we're not going to get the resources that we need to graduate.
And notably, despite the state's public equity goals and increased funding, there's a 20% graduation rate gap for black students, and it's been that way for 15 years.
Should we be using a metric to track equity that clearly conceals how the system is failing certain groups of students?
That's a question many would like answered by top officials at the Cal State University system.
So let me address this through sort of the history of how we...
Though we never really got a straight answer.
Will we see a revised equity gap goal?
Can it be changed?
Will you do that after this conversation with us?
Thank you for the challenge, right?
Executive Vice Chancellor Alva said if it was up to her, she would change the metric.
I'll be the first to acknowledge that is a very crude way of looking at these important within group variabilities.
But she's stopped short of committing to change it, noting they've used the metric for years.
I don't think it's wise for us to change the goalpost at this point.
But she stressed CSU can add additional goalposts and says they already analyze other equity data internally. It's just not the accountability metric they're judged by. Now, in response to the CalMatters data analysis, CSU made the raw data set easier to find.
We have updated access to that data set.
Though it still requires independent data analysis skills to identify the true equity gaps between racial groups. In contrast, San Diego State clearly and simply displays its school's unbundled equity data. Notably, San Diego is an outlier in the CSU system and has nearly closed its black graduation gap through robust resources and programs. Programs that Chris would like to see on all state school campuses. At Northridge, he says it wasn't until he joined an independent black fraternity that he finally felt he got the support he needed.
They were like, hey, if you need help with anything, even though I may not be your major, I can try to guide you and try to help you.
And while he wishes CSU would do more, he's doing his part to close the black graduation gap.
And I'm gonna graduate. I'm gonna walk that stage, make my parents proud.